piece because I noticed over the past several years how social media has broken party leaders. Used to be a party leader said you must vote this way or else you won't get all of this fundraising for all these support. Now, you have some of the craziest people go out saying the craziest things. They go on social media and online fundraising has completely broken the party's powers. Same thing happening in presidential contests. You're now saying it's happening with Donald Trump's fight against the bureaucracy, against the so-called deep state. How is social media breaking the deep state?
I mean, I think it's a huge story, actually, just as you say, of how social media has kind of rolled across these governing institutions. And Trump, like every president, by the way, more so, but like every president, frustrations with the bureaucracy, trying to get agencies to do what he wants, facing people like, briefly the IRS commissioner, where he appoints somebody, they get kind of persuaded, captured by their employees and come back to the White House and say, hey, maybe not everything you're doing is right. Trump just sent that guy to Iceland. And part of why that is happening is because he has, eyes on all of this via Laura Loomer, tons of other activists. When I asked somebody close to the White House, how is he pulling this off? How is he enforcing this kind of discipline, basically, to people who have, successfully resisted all sorts of initiatives from other presidents through the years? The answer is social media, basically. If you are a mid-level official in some agency and step out of line, you're likely to be swarmed on X in particular. That gets right back to the White House. And the rule there is now just like, you're out. They're going to fire them. They're going to deal with the, whether it was legal to fire them later.
Shoot first, ask questions later.
And it really has changed the way American government works. And I think what you're starting to see, actually, is some on the left say, hey, that actually is how it should work. And when we're in power, we like to see that. You were talking about Zoran Mamdani earlier. I think New York is going to be kind of an interesting test if he wins, whether kind of a social media-driven populist, how that's going to happen in government, whether the sort of DSA folks on social media are going to be enforcing that kind of discipline here in New York from the left.
And Jillian, what's fascinating is, of course, every president should have competent, effective leaders in mid-level bureaucracies, not working against them every day. We understand that, and it makes sense. But the problem comes when you start firing all the people at HHS who actually know what the hell they're doing. You start firing all the people at FEMA who know CDC. What the hell they're doing. You fire all the people at CDC who know what the hell they're doing. You fire, and suddenly, to actually believe in 50 years of peer-reviewed medical research, suddenly that becomes disloyal to Bobby Kennedy Jr. Fired?
I couldn't agree more. And everyone should go out right now and read Michael Lewis's book, The Fifth Risk, which he wrote a number of years ago about what people working in these bureaucracies, supposedly faceless bureaucracies, actually do. And he championed the heroes and the commitment to public service that drives so many of them. And it is just tragic how many lives are being ruined right now. Yes, there is government ways to cut, but not at the expense of smashing up all these lives. And just to pick up on Ben's point, because he makes such a powerful point about social media, one way to frame what's going on is basically people talk about civil war in America. There isn't, thank heaven, civil war in America. There is civil war in cyberspace. And right now, the Democrats are losing civil war in cyberspace.
And I think you can't sort of overestimate the degree to which a lot of folks in the White House really do not buy that argument, do not buy the Michael Lewis argument. Somebody told my colleague, Shelby Talcott, the other day, diplomatic experience is fake, just full stop. We just don't respect the idea that a lot of this kind of State Department, CDC experience means anything
well,
at all.
First of all, and yet this weekend, you go back to that person and say, find the time over the last 50 years where you've had the leaders of China, India, and Russia, or the old Soviet Union, shaking hands together, smiling, and basically say, screw you, America. I mean, that's one example of it. Or when you have somebody like Witkoff, as baffled and confused as he is, saying one thing to Donald Trump, saying another thing to European leaders, saying another thing to the press. What do you mean it doesn't matter? Yeah, actually, no, just... I'm not going to talk about University of Alabama football, but on all levels, in all things, experience matters, baby.
Get Pablo back on here, or Ed Luce.
All roads lead to Alabama.
Exactly.
So, I mean, is there not? Donald Trump is the most powerful man in America, and certainly in his own party. He could say no to the online mobs, could he not? In other words, If Bobby Kennedy Jr. is trashing the legacy of Operation Warp Speed and say the COVID vaccine is dangerous and we're going to restrict its availability now, and a lot of people who need it can't get it now, couldn't he just say, no, that's a bridge too far, I'm Donald Trump, I say no?
I think basically no. I think that this kind of generation of politicians who've risen on this social media wave are riding the tiger, and it's I think as you see in the case of the Epstein files, the only force they cannot say no to is their base on social media.
Right, and yet you look and see again, Bobby Kennedy Jr. going, full attack against Donald Trump's one of his great legacies of his first term, Operation Warp Speed. And by the way, that Kennedy article that you retweeted or reposted last night, man, that's devastating.
Yeah,
about RFK Jr. and the damage that he's done to his family, the pain he caused his mother. It just absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah, quick aside on that first. It's the cover of New York Magazine this week, a really powerful look at where the Kennedy family stands now and how so many of them are obviously upset at what RFK Jr. is doing, but are relatively powerless to stop it. There's sort of a dynasty in decline there. In terms of the social media, you make a great point about Epstein, and that many in the White House noted that to me. That was the first time that President Trump basically said, hey, knock it off. And they didn't. And even he took note that maybe he has a limit to how he can control the base. We also know he's always been very concerned about keeping the base happy. And we see that reflected in his social media post over the weekend about Bobby Kennedy Jr., where he floated like, well, we'll find out if COVID vaccines were helpful or not. When we know that they were, we know that for a short time, and President Trump himself just a few days ago touted Operation Warp Speed, saying, well, no one thought we could get it done, and we did, and it made a big difference. That's all true. It should be the first exhibit in the future Trump presidential library. It won't be, and now he's not only distanced himself from it because his base is unhappy, but now he's questioning whether it worked at all.
Something I've always been curious about, and anybody that has an answer, I'm all ears. Most politicians that gain power don't fear telling their base, hey, you may not disagree with me, but this is what we need to do. Follow me or don't. I don't really care. This is where we need to go. Donald Trump's never done that. And I've always found that to be curious. A guy that has as much control over his base seems to be the least likely to cross them. And this RFK Jr. thing's a perfect example.
Yeah, I mean, I do think he is in a different and more intense kind of relationship with voters and with the people who support him than previous presidents. Media? I do think it really does, and that he's just, he's testing things all the time. He's seeing how they come back to him on social media and the headlines people print out for him on linear TV, on Steve Bannon's show, and just constantly adjusting to what's coming back at him in a way that is pretty different.
The word they use for that is disintermediation. He's disintermediated all the consultants. He's disintermediated a lot of the mainstream media, and he has this direct relationship. But the image I have of social media today, it's a bit like we're talking about drone swarms in Ukraine. These are basically bot swarms, and that is what they're coping with just this extraordinary explosion of bot swarms, and they don't yet have a way of defending themselves against it in some cases.
And he's acting in a way like an influencer. Yeah. I mean, that's the model.
And by the way, Willie, a lot of people asked, when are we going to have the 7-syllable debate between Meacham and whom else? We have Gillian Tett.
There you go.
Intermediation.
Intermediation.
By the way, one last point, Ben, on your piece, which is really insightful, people should read it, is the voices on social media, on X and other places, those, as we all know by now, are the most extreme voices. Normal people don't participate in the conversation on social media. They may observe it. So what the president is getting, the feedback he's getting is that, oh, people really like Bobby Kennedy Jr. I should go along for the ride on that. I
mean, I think the lesson he's learned from the last 10 years from his political victory is you should listen to the most extreme voices.
Yeah, really quickly, we need a Keir Starmer political health update.
Yes.
Is he out of the 20s? Is he in the 30s? What is the latest on Keir Starmer?
Basically, deeply troubled. Being a sensible centrist technocrat these days is really hard. You can see that in France, where you've got a major crisis brewing right now around the government. But just desperately hoping that when the government comes back in the UK this autumn, they manage to get their act together.
Is it for right with Nigel Farage continuing to make great strides in the polls? The
more that Keir Starmer fails to convince the British voters that a technocratic, competent government is a bad idea because they can't fix the problems, the higher the likelihood that the populists basically come in.
Yeah.
All right.
We all need to fight against populism right now.
Columnist and member